This might be one of the most important tips for you guys to start your podcast from the beginning. What's going on, y'all? It's your boy Jalani Lion, and this is not the 10 Lions podcast. Today, I'm actually going to show y'all how to start your own podcast. For beginners, of course, because I'm a beginner myself with the 10 Lions podcast. But before we get into that, I need y'all to like, comment, subscribe, and share with anyone that you think that this could benefit or would appreciate this knowledge and information. We're trying to grow, we're trying to blossom. Both being able to see all these different how-to videos I may create. You'll also be able to see the different podcast episodes and how it operates in real time. So definitely hit that subscribe button and comment your feedback, comment your opinions. We definitely love to engage and talk to our audiences, and we even sometimes respond back to the audience when shooting a new podcast episode. So let's get into it. So the first thing you want to do when creating your own podcast, figure out a name for your podcast. Don't overthink it. Don't make it too long or too wordy or complicated. For example, my podcast is the 10 Lions podcast. Why is my podcast called the 10 Lions podcast? Well, my name is Jalani Lion. My brand is, I thought this was a Lionhearted hoodie. My brand is Lionhearted, and there's a song lyric from Fabulous, the rapper Fabulous. And in the lyric, he says, "We ain't gotta be 100 deep. I'd rather 10 lions than 100 sheep." So that line always stuck with me. So we 10 Lions podcast. Go. But yeah, so figure out your name, figure out your artwork for your podcast. Like if you're posting on Spotify or Apple or wherever the audio is gonna go, you gotta have a cover with your podcast. I'm proficient in Photoshop. I've been recommended Canva is a good app to use to create artwork. It's user friendly. Also, there's Fiverr where you can hit up different graphic designers and artists of that nature to create artwork for you on the cheaper end of the scale. So yeah, pick a name for your podcast, design or have someone else design the cover for your podcast. Lastly, determine your niche. Your niche is basically the category for your podcast. So whether you like sports or cooking or parenthood or writing or reading, or they even have like discussing criminal cases and whatnot, or whatever you enjoy doing or talking about, that should be what your podcast is about, because you're going to be devoting so much time and energy into it. So you might as well like and or love it. The 10 Lions podcast is a little different because we talk about different things, but the 10 Lions podcast is normally circled around music for the most part, because like I said, my name is Jalani Lion. I'm a music artist. I have different music projects out like Lion EP, Anime and Hip Hop, 23, and Butterfly Effect. Those are different projects of mine that are on all streaming platforms. So it just made sense to discuss music. Either we're talking about new releases from artists like Drake or Chris Brown or Taylor Swift, or we're talking about different things in pop culture, talk about different trending things and whatnot. But music is usually a common denominator for the 10 Lions podcast. The next thing you want to do is determine what kind of podcast are you going to have. Who is on the podcast? Is this going to be a solo podcast where it's just you talking to your camera or talking into a mic? Or is it going to be you and your friends, or you and your family members, like one or two of your family members or one or two of your friends talking and discussing a topic or conversations? I think they both have their pros and their cons, and they're both good choices for sure. Whether you want to be a solo podcast or not, or if you want to have guests on your podcast. The 10 Lions podcast is usually done with 3 people, 3 and or more people. It's usually done with 2 of my friends and myself, or one of my friends and a guest, or a different combination of the 2. Conversation is always bouncing off, and perspectives are always bouncing off from one to another. So that's what we like to do on the 10 Lions podcast. Just figure out what works best for you and then go for it that way. Next is get the gear and get started. Honestly, there's really not a lot that goes into the equipment for podcasting. All you really need is a mic, a camera, and lights. As far as equipment is considered, I don't think I'm leaving anything out. Helps to have a computer, obviously. Let's throw in a computer. So then 4 things. Podcasts can kind of range as far as price: an inexpensive podcast and a super expensive podcast, because you could have super expensive mics or super expensive cameras or super expensive lights and whatnot. But as beginners, I feel like it's best to start small and then work your way up. This lavalier mic is only about maybe $20 on Amazon, and I got 2 in one pack. And it just hooks up this mic. It's wireless, and it hooks up to my iPhone, because that's also the camera I shoot on. If you have a smartphone, whether it be an iPhone, perfect camera for starting a new podcast or shooting any type of content, honestly. So yeah, and as far as lighting, I've got like one small ring light and a few other lights, but honestly, we make the most of what we kind of have as far as lighting is considered. There's not too many flashy lights. But again, you want to start as a beginner, you want to start small and then work your way up. Helps to have a computer. If you don't have a computer, I think there's apps to work on your smartphone that can help you to post your podcast. I use my computer that I've had for, I don't even know, maybe 6 or 7 years. Next is scheduling and routine. If you're going to do a solo podcast, I feel like this is going to be one of your easier things to do. If it's just going to be you, just basically determining what day, what time you're going to be dedicating to the podcast and shooting the podcast. But if you are a podcast with guests, things start to get a little bit more complicated when you think of trying to schedule and have a routine for your podcast, because then you have to have multiple people on the same accord gathering in one specific location every week, every like Sunday or every Wednesday, or you know what I mean? So it's like, it gets a little bit tricky then, but as long as you guys get on the same page, it's definitely possible. On the 10 Lions podcast, we shoot once a week, every Sunday, and then we usually post the following Sunday, if not sooner than that. You definitely want to post your episodes about once a week, if not minimum once every other week. You know what I mean? So you want to stay consistent with your fans and your subscribers and your followers and whatnot. So 10 Lions podcast, we post every week. So there's a new episode every week, new content. Can't miss it. Location is definitely important because you gotta have somewhere to gather. Also, it makes it easy to store all the equipment in one spot. It makes everything that much easier. If you get the wireless mics like these, it kind of makes it more easier to have different locations. Like if you want to shoot a podcast in a coffee shop, or if you want to shoot it outside at the park, or like different places, or at the beach, you have different options when you work with like a wireless mic. So yeah, with the 10 Lions podcast, I'm a tattoo artist, so we shoot at my tattoo shop, Dark Arts Tattoo in Kingston, New York. And it just makes everything easier when we have different guests. They know where to go, they know about the tattoo shop, and they know where to find the location. It just sets everything up lovely. So we can just get right into shooting the podcast. Next on the list is distribution. So distributing meaning like distributing the podcast platforms like YouTube, to Spotify, to Apple Music, to Google, these different platforms. YouTube is the easiest platform to distribute to, especially if you're a video podcast, because all you have to do is sync the video that you shot your podcast with the audio from the microphones that you recorded with, put it together seamlessly, and then just upload it to YouTube. Simple. And honestly, if you're just an audio podcast and you're not using a video camera, that's also easy. You just take the audio, upload it to whether it be to YouTube or Spotify. It should be easier than adding the two elements together. But as far as different platforms besides YouTube, like Spotify, Google, iTunes, you're going to need a distributor to distribute your podcast to all these different platforms. Some distributors are Anchor or Buzzsprout or Podcastle. These are different distributors that distribute your podcast to different platforms. I personally have started to use Buzzsprout. It's very user friendly. It's gotten my podcast so far onto Spotify seamlessly, and it's been recommended and suggested from super big YouTube people. So I've been using Buzzsprout for 10 Lions podcast. So yeah, pick a distribution, whether it be Anchor, Buzzsprout, or Podcastle. Make it so that your podcast episodes are not just on YouTube. They're on Spotify, Apple, and Google, and all these different platforms that host podcasts. Last on the list is repurposing content. This might be one of the most important tips for you guys to start your podcast from the beginning. It's repurposing content. Whether it be short form or long form content, it is so important to repurpose content. Right now on YouTube and on TikTok and on Facebook, honestly, any social media platform you see, reels, shorts, and short form content are being pushed heavily. Like YouTube is prioritizing shorts right now, and the algorithm is pushing shorts, and this is easy if you repurpose content from your podcast. Basically, you take a little clip, whether it be 30 seconds to 60 seconds, 60 seconds being the maximum for shorts on YouTube. You shape it for the correct size of YouTube shorts and reels. I recommend adding captions, sound effects, and different things of that nature to boost the appeal and entertainment of your podcast. CapCut is a very useful tool that I use for the 10 Lions podcast that helps me to make shorts out of the podcast episodes. That's exactly what I do on the 10 Lions podcast. So yeah, try out these tips. Let me know how they work for you. I wish you guys so much success in your journey with starting your podcast. I hope this was helpful. If this was helpful, give me a comment, subscribe, because we're all just trying to grow. We're all beginners here, and we all can grow if we support each other, if we're there for each other and whatnot. And also let me know in the comments if this was helpful. Like, let me know what you thought about these. Give me your comments, give me your feedbacks, give me your opinions, and I'll do my best to get back to everyone who comments and subscribes. I'm your boy, Jalani Lion. This was not the 10 Lions podcast. We'll see you next time.